Thanks for joining us. I'm Adam, this is Dylan, we're from Adams Polishes, and we're here today to talk about polishing. Why not hand polish? Why use a machine? And what we want to do is explain the differences between all the machines that are out there and why not to use hand polish to try to get a perfect finish.
You might be asking yourself, what's wrong with hand polishing? Nothing really, but we have to set your expectations reasonably. By hand, you can only go like this so fast. These machines are going to go thousands of oscillations a minute, whereas maybe on a good day you could do 30 oscillations a minute, which is still going pretty quick. The results are going to be substantially lower. Hand polishing will get you better, but it's not going to get you perfect.
That's why they've been selling machines for years and years and years. Check out this machine, one of the very first buffers that dates back to the 1930s. Now, modern day machines are really refined. One of the machines that we've been selling for the longest is the Porter Cable Random Orbital Polisher. Now, this polisher only oscillates. It's not going to be a rotary buffer. It's not the kind of thing that you've thought about in your life. Oh, I'm afraid it's a rotary buffer. A rotary buffer is something that you would use after your car is painted. Something like this, where you hit the trigger and it's going to spin like crazy at a high speed. Now, the difference between rotary buffers and dual action polishers, the differences are wide. They're great. And we're going to explain to you why each machine has a very specific purpose.
Yeah, you've probably had that friend of yours come over and say, oh, you don't want to use a buffer in your car. I knew a guy who used a buffer once and he ruined his clear coat. We don't sell buffers. We sell polishers. A buffer, as Adam was showing, is a rotary tool. It's one that spins. We have tools that oscillate only. We have tools that oscillate and rotate. And most recently, this edition here, the Cyclo, is two heads that oscillate. What this does for you, this recreates the exact same movement you would make by hand. That circular motion of polishing a car. Everybody's familiar with it. You know, you can think of it as Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. It's that exact same movement, but it's done at a much higher rate of speed. So there's a lot more happening, a lot more correction happening. But because it's constantly changing the contact points, there's no heat buildup. There's no risk of burning the paint. There's no risk of removing too much clear coat like there would be with a professional tool like a rotary buffer.
And there's always a place for each. Now, we're going to walk through very briefly the differences between each tool. First, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the tool that we've been selling for almost 10 years. It's the Porter Cable 7424. I can actually hold onto the backing plate and turn it on. So with a polisher like this, it's difficult to cause damage, but there's a lot of vibration. Now, we recently stopped selling the Porter Cable. We sold it for years, but what happened was the three words "made in China" appeared on the box. That goes against our business practices, so we've discontinued the machine. It's still a very good machine. We've discontinued it for a variety of reasons, but one of which was that it was made in China.
So the next step up here in the line is our Flex Polisher. And some of you guys might already be familiar with this one. We've been selling it for a little while now. Awesome tool. This tool has that same orbital movement, but it incorporates a forced rotation. So there's actually a gear drive that's forcing it to spin. Whereas with the Porter Cable, you could press down hard enough to stop the pad from rotating. This one, no matter how hard you press, it's still going to rotate. This one's going to give you a little bit more bite, a little bit more cutting power. Also, we like it because it's got a pistol grip to the back and a nice bail head. This is a really comfortable tool to work with if you have to use it for an extended period of time. Whereas with the Porter Cable, not necessarily bad, but you're holding onto the body of the tool, not very comfortable. It's also got a throttled trigger to it instead of just a plain on-off switch. Gives you a little bit more control. We're big fans of the Flex here.
Indeed. And we've been selling it now for a few years. And really, one of the things that, for me, that when I go grab a tool off the cart and I start polishing, often, if I want to correct something quickly, if time is of the essence, and especially if I'm detailing for dollars, you know, I'm a detailer, or I've got to knock a car out in a hurry because I'm taking it to the show, I like the Flex's ability to really correct quickly. That forced rotation is so cool. And you know, the fact that you've got a variable speed trigger too, I love the variable speed trigger. So you barely hold it, it's going low. You wanna crank it all the way? You give it full throttle, it goes full throttle. You give it a little bit, it goes a little bit. Another thing I like the lockout. You know, you pull the trigger all the way, you got it locked, boom. you hit the little lockout switch. Now you don't need to be touching the trigger anymore. Now you're just grabbing onto the head of the polisher and the handle, and it gives you a really nice ability to concentrate on what you're polishing, and it reduces the need for you to concentrate on where you're at with the trigger speed. One more thing I like about these, and they're made in Germany, and they're just made with such incredible precision. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree.
They're just built well. They really feel like just such a really quality tool. So this tool right here has become definitely one of our best sellers, and we really find that this one does the job quick.
And kind of a complete departure from the design and look of this tool too is our newest addition, the Cyclo. Now, a lot of people have seen us put pictures of this online, and you may have even seen these used before. This tool has been around nearly 60 years in one form or another, which is really cool. It's 100% made in the USA, actually by a local company here to us in Colorado. They're up in Longmont. You might say, 60 years, wow, it's kind of a dated tool. The nice part is, though, is that they've been updating the internals. We were actually talking with the owner of Cyclo, and he was saying how they have tools come back that were handed down generation after generation. They can take this exact same tool, change out the internals, service any part of it. So it's a tool that's pretty much infinitely serviceable. It's jokingly a tool that you could hand down to your kids or even to grandkids at some point. They may still be using this tool because the parts are still available. Some of these tools nowadays, a lot of plastic, a lot of parts, things change. Servicing them isn't as easy. This is a cast metal housing and everything in it's serviceable. What's also really unusual about this tool is the fact that it has two 4-inch heads. Now these heads move in a very similar movement to the Porter cable. There's no forced rotation. They spin freely, but they oscillate. They oscillate at a perfect offset. So I'll flip it on to you so you can see. They're always at opposition to each other. This becomes really important. That makes this tool perfectly balanced. The vibration on this is extremely low, almost non-existent. This is a tool you could work with for hours and not have that, if you've ever used a Porter cable or the other ones, or a guy who's detailed for a while like us, kind of start to get that, the knuckles, So this is a tool that's gonna be much easier. The fatigue is gonna be much lower. I also love the fact that if you take two 4-inch heads, combine them together, we've got an 8-inch contact patch. They're offset about 5/16 of an inch either direction. You have almost 9 inches of polishing area. So even though this may not be as powerful as the Flex, it's going to do much larger surface areas, which cuts your time down significantly.
Yep. And one of the things that I really, really like about the Cyclo is the fact that as you're polishing, you're focusing the energy and the correction over two 4-inch pads, which means you're correcting more. You've got a smaller surface, and what you're able to do is make your Cyclo tool, your polisher, act somewhat almost like your 4-inch focus pads on the drill. It really corrects very quickly and very nicely. Having those little small patches also gives you the ability, let's say you're going up the door, like your A-pillar next to your windshield. You turn this sucker sideways and up you go. You've got a perfect patch and perfect placement in smaller areas where if you've got a big tool, it's harder to get a 6 3/4 or 7-inch pad, to go into those little small areas. This pad really gets into, or this tool rather, really gets into all those little nooks and crannies where it's a little bit tougher. You think it looks kind of obtuse with this big giant aluminum casing, but actually, the more we use it, the more we think, wow, if you're gonna grab one of the two tools and you're not doing a heavy, heavy amount of correcting, I'll grab the Cyclo every single time.
Absolutely. And also, the Flex operates at a top speed of 9,600 oscillations a minute, and it has to. The size of the pad requires that it's moving pretty quick to do the job. Whereas this has a cap speed of 3,200 oscillations per minute. Obviously, each individual head moving at that speed, but because you're working with a smaller pad and concentrating that polishing power, the speed doesn't have to be as high. This is absolutely the safest tool for anybody to pick up as a novice and use. I'm not saying that if you pick up the Flex as your first tool, you're going to have a hard time or you're going to do something to damage your car, but the learning curve is definitely much, much lower on the Cyclo versus some of the other tools on the market.
Agreed. Another thing, I'm gonna hold this thing. Look at the vibration on my hand. As I start, speed 1, and all the way up. This thing is totally still. You're polishing, and with the action of these two heads which orbit perfectly, there's literally no vibration. We set a glass of water on the actual tool when we were testing it. Like, can you believe that? You look inside the glass of water and the water is just barely moving, barely. I mean, it's incredibly well balanced.
And that's what happens when you've been designing and kind of building the same tool for as long as they have. They've had a chance to take a tool from prototype probably at some point 60 some years ago, and they've continued to refine it for years and years and years. So you're left with a tool that pretty much they've worked all the bugs out for you. There is no guesswork left in a Cyclo.
Bingo.
So just to recap on some of the stuff we've discussed here, the Cyclo, very easy to use, very low vibration, and great for moderate to light correction work. This isn't going to do any heavy restoration work, but the trade-off is it's very smooth, low fatigue on your hands. You won't end up with that tingly hand feeling at the end. It's also a very versatile tool. Great for beginners. The Flex, still decent for beginners, probably a slightly steeper learning curve, but far more powerful. This tool is going to take out more significant damage. This is an ideal tool if you have a car with very hard clear coat, or you have pretty significant damage, some more serious swirl marks. It's definitely not going to completely remove deep scratches, but it's definitely going to address those deeper washing swirls and imperfections like that.
Now, moving on to the Porter Cable, while we no longer sell the tool, certainly we do support it. The Porter Cable Polisher is decent for beginners. You don't want to do more than a panel or two at a time, or else it'll vibrate the hands off the end of your wrists. The tool is effective. It only orbits. If you have a dark color vehicle, I would definitely stay away from the Porter Cable because it's very difficult to get a perfect finish with the Porter Cable. Now, back over to the buffers. We discussed them briefly earlier. When you've painted a car and then you're going to color sand it or wet sand it, and then you're going to buff it, that's when you need a rotary buffer. There's a place for a rotary buffer. However, it's not in your maintenance program. This is not a maintenance tool. When you were told, oh, I used a buffer once, or someone told me once I used a buffer and they buffed the paint off, and they're looking at the primer, oh no, terrible. That's this tool. This tool is not one that we sell. However, this is a great tool and a necessary tool in a body shop and for use by professionals. Finally, the focus pads, which you would use with your cordless drill. When you're trying to remove scratches, you really want to focus on that very specific scratch. This tool is the one you use to remove those scratches. Fingernail scratches, kids going down the side of their car with the handlebars. There's those little scratches that happen to your car that none of these tools are going to remove. You want to be able to really focus on those scratch marks with something very small and rotary like this drill. Now, when you're done with this drill, it's going to leave holograms, just like a rotary buffer will. Just like when you got your car back from the body shop and they'd painted one door, you notice those big, giant, crazy holograms all over it. This will leave those to a much lesser extent. And you're going to want to follow the focus pads and the drill with either of these three machines, just to get the finish perfect again. Next, we're going to go ahead and show you the polishing pads for each of these tools and the polishes that go with each pad so that you can get a completely flawless finish on your vehicle.